Another disappointing loss for the New Orleans Saints, but a silver lining awaits. Did the New Orleans Saints find yet another undrafted free agent rookie gem and wide receiver and return specialist Rashid Shaheed? We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy the way that it should be played. You simply pick 2 to 5 players, choose whether or not they're going to come in at more or less than their Prize Picks projections. You get those right, you can win up to 10 times your entry. First-time listeners and first-time users, rather, can get a 100% instant deposit match of up to $100 by using the promo code LOCKEDON at prizepicks.com or on the Prize Picks app. Tell you more about them later. As of right now, we need to discuss these New Orleans Saints, who are not the New Orleans Saints that we expected them to be as the season was beginning. So how do they get there? We'll talk about how they improve. We'll talk about what went right, what went wrong. We'll break it all down for the New Orleans Saints 30-26 loss against the Cincinnati Bengals. But first, Weber State wide receiver and return specialist Rashid Shaheed was elevated for this game, and he might be the next undrafted free agent gem in the city of New Orleans. Now, he was elevated in this game mostly to contribute as a return specialist, right? Because Deonte Harty is on injured reserve. He's dealing with a turf toe injury or a toe injury. I believe it's a significant turf toe injury. The Saints were also down all three of their top wide receivers, Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, and Jarvis Landry. And so you knew that Rashid Shaheed was going to get some reps on offense as well, very likely to get mixed in a bit. You saw him take a shot to him early on in the game, just kind of lost tracking of the ball a little bit. Andy Dalton, not the greatest ball placement on the throw either. But when they turned around and they handed it to the young man over on the offensive side, a jet sweep finally works in New Orleans. We've seen them try jet sweeps before, but not really ever come to fruition. This one worked. 44-yard rushing touchdown, explosive speed from the rookie out of Weber State. Now, he had some okay returns. He had about a 6-yard punt return. He had about a 25. No, it was like a 19-yard kick return, if I remember correctly. So he didn't really pop off in the return game. However, ball control, he didn't lose the ball, and he made good decisions. So you'll accept both of those as still improvements from where the New Orleans Saints had been at the beginning of the season when it came to the return game. So not only could Rashid Shaheed be the next undrafted free agent gem in New Orleans, he could end up displacing one of the most recent undrafted free agent gems in Deonte Harty. Deonte Harty right now dealing with an injury, had some conversations with the Saints early on in the offseason for a long-term contract extension. That didn't get done. It didn't look like that was going to get done at any point during this season. Then you look at Deonte Harty's performance so far this year. He hasn't been the most reliable kick returner, hasn't been the most reliable punt returner either. Kind of does not have the explosiveness that we're accustomed to seeing from him, that we've grown to expect to see from him. We've seen some turnovers, some muffed kicks, things like that, which coaches have pointed out very directly during press conferences and pressers and things like that. Now, all of a sudden, if Rashid Shaheed can just give you good ball control, good decisions, and then, one or two big breakaway returns, but then also be able to find ways to contribute over an offense like you saw today, he could potentially end up being the reason that the New Orleans Saints might be comfortable letting Deonte Harty walk over the course of this offseason. Right now, he's only on a 1-year deal. He's on a RFA tender. And that's all the New Orleans Saints have done with him. They haven't. It seemed that they were far away when it came to contract extensions and contract discussions, things like that. Kind of feels reminiscent of what happened with C.J. Gardner-Johnson. The Saints probably don't want to pay Deonte Harty the money of a usual wide receiver, a typical wide receiver, much like they didn't want to pay C.J. Gardner-Johnson, and I think rightfully so, the money of a typical safety. And instead, they wanted to pay him for the role that he played, which in this New Orleans Saints offense this season is pretty non-existent. The Saints haven't utilized him very much. Deonte Harty over on the offensive side. But they probably would be willing to pay him long-term as a returner, as a return specialist. Now that they've added Michael Thomas, Jarvis Landry, Chris Olave, usually you would say under normal circumstances, you would say, well, there's not a lot of room for Deonte Harty to get involved. Right now, of course, they're dealing with injuries at all three of those players, but also dealing with an injury to Deonte Harty, so he's not even able to get out on the field to show his value as a wide receiver right now. So if the Saints are hesitant around extending Deonte Harty for a long-term deal, Rashid Shaheed could be the reason that the Saints are comfortable doing it. And when you see what it is that Shaheed did with the ball in his hands today, it's easy to see why the New Orleans Saints are very excited about the Weber State alum. Remember, he's the FCS record holder in kick return touchdowns in a career with 7. He holds several records within Weber State as well as his conference as a returner. And he also holds a couple of records as an all-around player as well, with over 5,000 all-purpose yards in his collegiate career. So now you see the New Orleans Saints finding ways to utilize him. They threw a deep pass to him. They handed it off to him with a jet on that jet sweep that turned into a touchdown. A little disappointing to not see him get the ball more beyond that. That was kind of it. They kind of said sayonara to him right after that, which was unfortunate. But that's not about Rashid Shaheed. That's just poor decision making by the New Orleans Saints in that case. So we'll see what it is that the Saints end up doing with Rashid Shaheed, but he's going to continue to get more and more opportunities. He wasn't just a standard game day elevation for this one. He was moved to the active roster. So that's where he's going to stay, at least for now. So we'll see. Just 4 days away now before the New Orleans Saints take on the Arizona Cardinals in Arizona. And Rashid Shaheed's going to get more opportunities while he's there. Coming up next, what went right? What went wrong? What did the New Orleans Saints do well? What did the New Orleans Saints not do well? Where did they not execute based on our keys to victory and our game plan for the Saints to win this game? They're almost there, but a couple of key things that they could not get done. We're going to break it all down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. But first, let me tell you about our friends over at Nugenics. So if you're somebody maybe that's feeling like you just can't get in shape, right? You're working really hard, you've aged a bit, and it's not your fault if that's the case. As men age, your body kind of naturally loses testosterone. That's why a product like Nugenics Total T is so important, because it contains the man-boosting key ingredients like testofen, which have been validated in 5 clinical studies that have shown to boost that free testosterone that are dropping, whose levels drop in men over the course of our aging period. So while every product professes quality, many of the other products out there use generic ingredients and are far less effective than Nugenics Total T. So don't worry about all the generic stuff. Go and get the stuff that's going to make a difference for you, because Nugenics Total T is the #1 selling testosterone booster over at GNC as well. Now you can get a complimentary bottle of Nugenics Total T simply by texting NFL to 231-231. Grab your phone and text now so you can get a bottle of Nugenics Thermo as well, their most powerful fat incinerator ever, which also has key ingredients to help get you back into shape fast, absolutely free. All you got to do is text NFL to 231-231. That's NFL to 231-231. Message and data rates apply. Terms apply. You can find those terms as they are available over at nugenics.com/terms. I'm also going to tell you about our friends over at Athletic Greens. Their AG1 powder is one of my favorite products on the market, period, as a whole. So 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source, superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens, all in one little scoop in a cup of water to start off your morning, just right before you have your cup of coffee, and boom, you're good. You're there. You're getting the ingredients that you need to support gut health, to support your nervous system, to support your immune system, recovery, focus, sleeping, resting, aging, everything that you can imagine. AG1 can help you out with, and it's super, super easy. And to make it even easier, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs of AG1 with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NFL Network. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/NFL Network to take advantage of your health and take ownership of your health and get the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, every Friday, NFL key predictions over on the Locked On NFL YouTube page and Locked On NFL podcast get you all the information you need from our local experts on the 5 biggest games of the week, including Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football, and all of the betting odds that you need and betting advice that you need from the industry's leaders over at BetOnline. We said on Friday, if the New Orleans Saints did these 5 things, that they would win against the Cincinnati Bengals. Let's recap those 5 things, and we'll break down what the New Orleans Saints did well and what went wrong for the New Orleans Saints. And the first one is one of those things that went wrong. The New Orleans Saints needed to be able to get pressure on the front four, and not just get pressure, but get their hands on Joe Burrow, get some sacks, let him know that they're there. The Saints got a few sacks in this one, Demario Davis namely, but they also missed on about 2 or 3 different sacks as well. So it's going to walk away from this game with, 3 sacks? They should walk away with 5 or 6. And one of the biggest ones is going to be, of course, the touchdown in the red zone that turned into a scramble by Joe Burrow, where the Saints brought a lot of pressure. Tyrann Mathieu around one edge, linebackers elsewhere, but then left this gaping hole right in the middle of the defense. David Onyemata looked like he kind of got pulled down as he was kind of, ships in passing in the night kind of a situation with Joe Burrow. Wide open, the entire field for Joe Burrow to just waltz right into the end zone. So that was probably the most egregious one that you look at and say, okay, well, that cost you the game in a way, because it gave the Cincinnati Bengals points, right? It resulted in points. And that was on a 3rd down. So you're looking at potentially ending the drive there, maybe potentially getting a sack that puts them out of field goal range, or at least long enough field goal range that you run the risk of McPherson missing that. Or at least you just, at the worst, you get the sack there and then you give up the field goal, but then you save yourself 4 points, which was the difference of this game, right? Instead, Joe Burrow runs right up the middle and then he scores a touchdown. So the Saints did not do this well in terms of getting pressure on Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow looked comfortable throughout this game, even after getting sacked, right? And there was a good moments where the Saints got back-to-back sacks. Mario Davis got back there along with Marcus Davenport, and then another one from Caden Ellis that got back there as well. So the Saints, they got home on a couple of occasions, and sometimes getting home in the 4th quarter on 3rd downs, right? Late in downs, late in quarters, late in the game is better than getting those sacks in the 1st quarter, things like that. But regardless, if you're also giving up these big scrambles, you're giving up sort of the extended play, big gains and stuff like that, it's going to make it really, really tough. So that's one that the New Orleans Saints did not do well. Disrupting timing on defense. That was another one that did not go well for the New Orleans Saints. It felt like these wide receivers and Joe Burrow were in rhythm the entire game, and they were certainly in rhythm in the 4th quarter, where Joe Burrow went 7 of 8 for 116 yards and a touchdown. So the Saints did not necessarily throw that rhythm off, and that was something they needed to do, especially without having Marshawn Lattimore on the field. You had Marcus May back, which was great. Paulson Debo was available to you, but Paulson Debo, Bradley Roby on the outside did very little to throw these wide receivers off of their course. Now, some of that could be play calling, right? Should they have been in press man situations where you're getting your hands on these wide receivers off the line of scrimmage, as opposed to sitting further off in a lot of zones, which ended up giving the slant after slant after slant after slant to these Cincinnati Bengals receivers? Maybe. But either way, you did not disrupt the timing on defense, whether it be because of play calling or whether it be because of execution. Didn't happen. Establish the run game with Alvin Kamara. Hey, they did that. The New Orleans Saints got this right. 99-yard rushing day for Alvin Kamara. He almost had 2 straight 100-yard rushing days. That does not happen much for the star running back, who is utilized in so many different ways that you don't need him to be a perennial 100-yard rusher. He can still be a perennial 150 total yard player for you. Yards from scrimmage, probably more important a metric for gauging Alvin Kamara's success than simply rushing yards. But it was great to see them establish the run game with Alvin Kamara, which was something that we kind of hoped that they were going to do, especially with following up that performance against the Seattle Seahawks. I thought the Saints did great establishing the run game, 228 rushing yards in this game, but unfortunately you had to get away from it late in the game when the game was on the line, because you only had 1 minute and 30 seconds to where you trailed, and that ended up being the difference for you in this game in terms of holding possession while trailing. They also got the run game going with Taysom Hill a little bit as well. He had 38 rushing yards, not huge, but 7.8 yards per carry. He had the big 31-yard run. Saints had a big 24-yard run, 31-yard run back-to-back between Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill. It looked like things were really going in the run game, but the Saints just simply didn't stick with it. So they established it, but they didn't have the opportunity to stick with it. Scored touchdowns in the second half. They did that. They got into the end zone. But I think the bigger thing here is that they didn't score touchdowns when in position to score touchdowns. 4 straight field goals on red zone possessions. That's not going to win you games. You're going to lose games that way. And that was a huge, huge issue for this New Orleans Saints team in this one. They came into this game 80% of the time converting red zone possessions into touchdowns. 20%, 1 for 5 in the red zone in this game. It's unacceptable. You're not going to win games that way, especially when you're giving up a 100% touchdown rate to the opposing team in the red zone. Cincinnati Bengals went 3 of 3. Finally, flip the field. Got to be able to do that, and I'll say that they did it kind of, right? The New Orleans Saints came into this game ranked 29th in starting field position, starting at no better than their own 25-yard line. 25.1 was their average starting field position. So far this season, their average starting field position in this game, 29.4. So much better in this one. However, they still allowed the Cincinnati Bengals to have a 29-yard average start. The good news, though, is that up until the final 2 drives, which includes the kneel down drive, which we don't really even have to count, but 26-yard line, 25-yard line, 22-yard line, 20-yard line, that's where Cincinnati was starting its drive. So really, I think the Saints did do a good job flipping the field on special teams. It's just that you gave them the ball in the 40, the most important part of the, most important time of the game, and then you give up a 60-yard touchdown pass at that time. It's just bad timing at that point. So if you were been able to pin them back a little bit further, we saw Blake Gillikin with a 59-yard punt, a 61-yard punt at different times. Unfortunately, that one got away. So and that ended up being the difference for you, right? Like everything really in terms of how this game went, you can look at 2 things. You can look at where it went wrong, which was the red zone, the red zone inefficiencies on both the offensive and the defensive side. Where it went right, which was the run game for the New Orleans Saints, 228 total yards on the ground in this one. But then what decided the game? It feels like it was 1 drive and 2 tackles, 2 missed tackles that really decided this game. And everything was kind of in this perfect storm for the Cincinnati Bengals to be able to take advantage of. It was the one time they were starting at anything better than their own 26-yard line in the entire game. It was the fourth quarter where Joe Burrow was just cooking. It was the issues with not throwing these guys off of their timing at all over on the offensive side. And it was the issues of the missed tackles. So you want to know what the New Orleans Saints didn't do well? That's everything that you need was culminated in that one drive, that one play at the end of the game. So how do the New Orleans Saints get better from here? That's the big question. Can they fix some things before they head to Glendale, Arizona to take on the Arizona Cardinals on Thursday? We'll break it down and say, and at least discuss what it is the New Orleans Saints need to get better at in order to get a win this weekend and try to right the ship as quickly as possible as the window continues to close. We got that coming up for you as we continue on to wrap up today's episode of Locked on Saints. But before we get to that, I'm going to tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy the way that it should be, the way that if you put all the world's greatest minds in one room and said, hey, create daily fantasy football, this is the way that they would get it done. All you have to do is pick 2 to 5 players, choose whether or not they're going to come in at more or less than their Prize Picks projection. For instance, this past week, Alvin Kamara was set at his projection being 63.5 rushing yards, and whether or not he would come in at more or less, I chose that he would come in at more. He did, 99 yards. Therefore, I win. It's that simple. I also picked Joe Burrow to go over 260.5 passing yards. Got that right too, unfortunately. So that's all it takes. You do that and you win money. You can win up to 10 times your entry by getting those picks correct. And for first-time users, all you have to do is use the promo code LOCKEDON by heading over to prizepicks.com or downloading the Prize Picks app, and you're going to get a 100% instant deposit match of up to $100. So you deposit $100, you get $100. You deposit $50, Prize Picks will match you $50. That's simple. So head over today. You can download the app or head over to prizepicks.com. And don't forget to use that promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, so you can get that 100% instant deposit match of up to $100. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked on Saints with 3 things the New Orleans Saints can and need to fix if they want to get things back on track. It's important to say, I'm sitting here and I'm harping on this New Orleans Saints team quite a bit after this game, and that's just what happens when you lose in the fashion that they lost it. I mean, this is yet another example of the New Orleans Saints sort of beating themselves and finding a new way to beat themselves, which is understandably frustrating for the team, for fans, for coaches, for staff, for everyone involved. So I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit, but the fact of the matter is that this team was also down its top 3 wide receivers, down its QB1, down its starting cornerback, and everything like that. Every team in the NFL deals with injuries, though, so we can't make that the reason the New Orleans Saints lost when they actually did some of the things that we did not expect them to be able to do here on the field. As I sit in the Caesars Superdome, we didn't expect them to be able to even get 5 red zone possessions in this game, considering their wide receiver core and the way that it was decimated. And they were going up against the NFL's number 7 run defense in the Cincinnati Bengals. And they still found a way to do that. They found a way to string together long drives, 10, 14, 11 play drives, 5, 6, 7 minutes off the clock, all of that stuff, getting in the red zone, but not being able to cash in and finish off these drives with touchdowns. That ended up being the big thing. So, yes, we can acknowledge the injuries. We can acknowledge those things, but the Saints still have to execute better if they want to win. And there's 3 pretty achievable things that they could do, or at least they feel readily available, right? And we covered some of this in the postcast, but let's get a little bit more in depth. Tackling is the number 1 priority. If this team can't tackle, this team can't win. And we saw that. Again, everything in terms of the microcosm of the experience of the New Orleans Saints for the entire season can be summed up in that Jamar Chase 60-yard touchdown, which was one of the easiest 60-yard touchdowns I've ever seen a player score in the NFL. And that came down to missed tackle. And then all of a sudden he was gone, right? So you have to fix the tackling. And we saw the tackling rear its ugly head, as we mentioned, in 3 different ways, right? That big touchdown, a couple of other yards after catch, yards after contact on some of the slant patterns and things like that, those inside quick routes that Cincinnati was really running. And then, of course, the sacks where Joe Burrow got away. So that's the big thing. I think the number 1 thing that you have to fix for this team, or if you are this team, is your tackling. You have to be better here. The other thing that you look at, and point number 2 here, that is something that this Saints team should be able to fix, is its play calling in the red zone. Relying on your playmakers to make plays in the red zone. You don't need to be throwing, passes over the middle for 2 yards and hoping that Mark Ingram's going to be able to turn around and pick up, another 8 in the midst of 3 linebackers all around him. That's not effective game planning in the red zone. You have to be able to utilize the talent that you have. Taysom Hill, Alvin Kamara, of course, who is like one of the best red zone weapons in the NFL traditionally or typically over the course of his career, but has been severely underutilized there so far this season. And now you look at, you get Michael Thomas back, that certainly helps you. You get Jarvis Landry back, Chris Olave back, that certainly helps you as well. So that can inherently get better without having to really adjust much, but just by simply having the talent out on the field. And to stick with that for just a second, you can't really fix health, but boy, if the New Orleans Saints could just get some luck with health moving forward, that would be a massive help for them. They brought in Matt Rhea over the course of this offseason to help with soft tissue injuries. And truthfully, soft tissue injuries have been down for this team, but concussions, rib injuries, abdominal injuries, turf toe, things like that, like impact types of injuries have been the real issue for them. So that's overshadowing where the Saints have made strides so far this season when it comes to the injury conversation. So you have to get better there. And again, that's probably not one of the 3 things that's more readily available to you and like easily accessible in terms of how you improve those things, but definitely something that, like, if that could just go right for a little while, the Saints would inherently see some improvement. The last thing that I would point to here when it comes to the Saints, we looked at tackling. We talked about the red zone usage. The very last thing, I think, is just leaning on your playmakers. And that kind of goes into the same kind of pot as red zone usage, right? Leaning on your playmakers in the red zone, but really just leaning on your playmakers as a whole and not like abandoning things that are working. I mean, we've watched the New Orleans Saints do this time and time again to where the run game is working. It's percolating. They're getting it going. They're picking up big yards, run after run after run after run. And then all of a sudden that player just stops touching the ball. There was this drought for Alvin Kamara for a little while. There was a drought, they just stopped using Rashid Shaheed after he scored a touchdown. There was a drought in the second half when it came to Taysom Hill. They decided to throw the ball with Taysom Hill as opposed to doing what it is that Taysom Hill does best, which is running the ball with him. And they still haven't gotten him involved in the receiving game or the passing game as a receiver. These are of huge detriment to this New Orleans Saints team. So when you know that you have these playmakers, you have the potential to be able to make a big impact with this team, you miss the boat here on Sunday. And that's part of what ended up losing the game for you. So again, and just like I mentioned during the postcast, like it just feels like I'm describing good football after a certain point, but that's just how close this New Orleans Saints team really is. It's just that the issue is that they're not close on one thing that would make them a winner. They're close on the several things that they need to improve in order to be winners. 2-4 on the season. That leaves them about a 10.4% chance to make the playoffs. Thankfully, they're in a bad division. The Atlanta Falcons are tied for the division lead with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 3-3. The Saints are just one game behind. So the season's not over for them. The window's not closed, but you need to get healthy. You got to clean up the tackling. You have to execute better. You have to be successful in being able to finish drives, and you got to lean on the playmakers. You do those things, which again is all just sounds like good football stuff. That's how close you are. The issue is that you're so close on several different things as opposed to just being so close on one thing that would make all the difference for you. So can the New Orleans Saints make all of those adjustments? We'll see. And they have a tight turnaround to try to make as many of them as possible before they take on the Arizona Cardinals later on this week. Coming up on Tuesday, we'll break everything down from an analytics standpoint and take a look at EPA. We'll take a look at DVOA as well for the New Orleans Saints, some advanced metrics to let you know whether or not they have been efficient or inefficient, where they've been efficient, where they've been inefficient. And of course, as always, we'll discuss how you impact that, how you improve that, or how you maintain all of that as well. So we got more coming up for you here all throughout the week. We're going to break down for you as the New Orleans Saints get ready for their big matchup against the Arizona Cardinals just a few days away. Appreciate you as always making me your first listen of the day every day for your second listen. Don't forget to go and check out that Peacock and Williamson NFL show for all of your NFL news and analysis in less than 30 minutes with former NFL scout Matt Williamson and NFL analyst Brian Peacock. Appreciate you as always making Locked On Saints a part of your day, a part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And if you want anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.